According to Nelly, hip-hop had its roughest period during the 2010s. He has 2 points of view. During his appearance on The Shop, the rapper from St. Louis discussed his achievement at the Grammy Awards and boldly asserted how difficult it was to be a rapper in the aughts. Thursday saw the arrival of Nelly, Cedric the Entertainer, and Becky Hammon, the 2-time champion head coach of the WNBA's Las Vegas Aces, in the 7th season premiere of The Shop, an interview program hosted by Maverick Carter, Paul Rivera, and occasionally LeBron James. As the name implies, The Shop is arranged as a makeshift barbershop, which has long been thought of as a place where black males, in particular, have the most candid and in-depth talks about life. In this episode, the Las Vegas Aces home court was converted into a barbershop. Anyway, there's a video of a portion of the conversation, possibly the most explicit or interesting part, that's making the rounds on social media, in which Nelly claims that the 2010s were the hardest years for hip-hop because, naturally, at the time he was releasing music, he was up against artists like DMX, Jay-Z, Eminem, Lil Wayne, 50 Cent, Ludacris, and others. His argument was that there was intense competition among all those rappers for the #1 slot in the rap industry, and since they were all well-known artists, the competition was fierce, making it the hardest time to release music, and I'm not totally in disagreement. He also overlooked Kanye West, who in the aughts was occupying a lot of space with his releases of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, The College Dropout, Late Registration, Graduation, 808 Seconds and Heartbreak, and Late Registration. You may be wondering why he would say something like that. Paul Rivera's remarks regarding rap music at the Grammy Awards, specifically mentioning Killer Mike's 3 highly sought-after rap category wins, none of which were broadcast on television, ignited the discussion. Nelly declared that the Grammy Awards have to improve. Nelly responded to Paul's question about whether he had a grudge from St. Louis by listing the opponents he was up against at the time, which is somewhat illogical. Perhaps more importantly, though, was that he had a competitive edge that drove him to succeed in the face of such heavyweights of the industry throughout that decade. There would be no disputing that Nelly was the game's killer. However, it raises the question of whether Nelly's popularity and record-breaking period were due to his peers or to other factors. It's a challenging question. Certainly, taking on all of those musicians during a period when musicians like DMX achieved platinum status with 2 albums released in the same year, It's Dark and Hell is Hot and Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood. Jay-Z was releasing hits like and selling albums, The Black Album and The Blueprint. After all, Eminem is one of the best-selling musicians of all time, and the majority of his sales occurred in that decade. In 2003, 50 Cent dropped Get Rich or Die Tryin', one of the most influential albums ever, and then he did the same with The Massacre. The point is that Nelly is correct when he says that he was releasing and selling records during a time when some of the greatest names in hip-hop were doing the same and when record sales required actual album purchases. It's noteworthy that one of the biggest musicians moving that many units at a time when people could choose from so many other great performers. However, I believe that the 1990s were the most difficult decade for competitors. Rappers were only beginning to be able to turn hip-hop into legitimate careers. Placing records in stores and generating the kind of sales that would propel you was much, much harder. Since there was no internet in the early part of the decade, journalists acted as gatekeepers in a way that blogs democratized. For example, in the 2010s, if a blogger liked you, they might go above and beyond to make sure they highlighted you as much as possible. In the 1990s and the 1980s, this effect was much less pronounced. There may not have been enough artists in the 1980s, at the very least, to really be competing in the same manner, but the 1990s gave rise to a huge number of iconic first albums from musicians who would continue to draw fans far into the 2010s. I believe that because the 2010s were the decade of the blogger, artists had a lot more supporters, sometimes making the gatekeepers of the past irrelevant. Look, this isn't exactly a controversial hip-hop conversation. Although I'm not even entirely clear what Nelly was trying to say, it's an intriguing notion. Above all, as with many of the other artists he mentioned, rappers like Nelly were able to attain heights of success often only attained by the biggest pop stars, and Nelly is still relevant today, another almost inconceivable accomplishment. So these are just a few of her many hits.